Hi, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Sitting in the office, it's December 22nd, 2020. And as I promised yesterday, as I learned a little bit more about what's going on with Ripple, I'd go ahead and keep you guys in the loop. There's indeed a Wells notice, it looks like, was sent to Ripple, which is why they replied. And they did a very unorthodox thing where they actually released a summary of their Wells submission, which is the rebuttal. So generally, what happens is if the SEC is going to go after you, they do something. They send you a letter or a communication called a Wells notice, and then you reply to it, and then they make a decision whether to file a lawsuit or not. Generally speaking, if it gets to the Wells notice stage, about 4 out of 5 times they pursue an enforcement action. About 20% of the time they drop it, give or take. So anyway, in the show notes, I've included a summary of Ripple's Wells submission response. It's about 6 pages long, and they provide kind of a factual background and introduction. They go ahead and provide a little bit of an analysis with the Howey test, and then they kind of ended on some policy reasons why it would be problematic if Howey was applied. So there's a lot of stuff here. It's a pretty meaty document, and it's a very compelling response. So based upon the response that they have, it's obviously dependent on facts and circumstances. It doesn't really look like the SEC has a very strong case. The other thing that's incredibly puzzling is the chairman of the SEC is going to be leaving here towards the end of the year. And so basically this colossal, very high profile securities case would then be handed to an interim chairman starting next year in a completely new political administration. So it's very strange, very unorthodox, never really seen something like this before, and it's typically not done. They mention on-demand liquidity products. They mention statements from the DOJ and FinCEN back in 2015. They mentioned the unique node list and the validators, where the supermajority is not in the hands of the Ripple company. And it definitely is going to have an impact on the space as a whole if it continues its way through. So most likely outcome is that nothing is going to happen in the next few weeks. And if there is going to be a filing in court, that's probably going to occur January, February time horizon. And then this would be a litigation that would take potentially quite some time. It could be greater than a year to 2 years of effort. And it would definitely create regulatory clarity on what is a security and what is not a security. But according to things that the SEC has already said and done, and their statements they've made on Bitcoin and Ethereum, and the facts and circumstances of the XRP case, I don't believe that XRP is a security under those standards and statements. And it'd be quite problematic for the SEC to capture this under their definition, because it would inadvertently capture most of the cryptocurrency space if desired. There's really no way to satisfy it. And it's not clear how would you even operate a system. For example, if somebody was responsible for reporting, if the reporting entity goes out of business, the protocol and currency are still there. So then who reports for it? If Ripple was to be a security, then every U.S. holder of XRP would be holding securities and actually in violation of securities laws themselves. And they would lose all liquidity in the United States, but then enjoy, because they've already been approved as a currency or another instrument abroad, different forms of liquidity abroad. So it's an incredibly puzzling case. It's quite bizarre. And just unbelievable to me that it would be issued right before Christmas, just a few days before the end of the year. And when there's a transfer of power from one administration to another, one group to another group. It looks like a bad decision, all things considered. So you guys should read the Wells submission, the counter argument, the summary that XRP put out. And if there is a lawsuit, we'll all be able to read that together, but nothing's going to happen in the next few weeks. It's going to take a little while. And this is kind of the final threshold before they file. As I mentioned, 4 out of 5 times when it gets to this point, they do. 20% of the time they don't. Given the unorthodox reality of things, they probably will take this one a little bit more seriously. Obviously, Ripple's going to activate their $1 billion war chest to turn on their PR and media machine. For us as an industry, this is really an existential moment for the U.S. government to really get serious about whether they want to be a major player in the cryptocurrency space or not. Probably the most poignant thing in this entire document is right on page 6 in section 4C, where it says no foreign regulator has determined that XRP is a security. In fact, the opposite is true. The United States would be an unfortunate outlier. The U.S. likes to believe it controls the whole world and it runs every regulatory agency, but the reality is it doesn't. And that's becoming very clear as we go into the 21st century. And this is kind of a bellwether test on whether it makes sense as a cryptocurrency infrastructure company to base your infrastructure company in the United States and do business in the U.S. market, or whether that market is closed off or not. So as an industry, it's in everyone's best interest, whether they be Ethereum or Cardano or a Polkadot, for this to be won by Ripple. Frankly, there's no upside in giving such broad powers to a regulatory body where that regulatory body has no checks and balances or oversight and can basically arbitrarily at any point just decide, we're going to ruin your entire ecosystem. There's 8 years of history here, for better or for worse. There's a lot of things that have happened. A lot of steps have been taken, and it's a very different ecosystem than it was in 2012. And that's true for most cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin included. At a particular period of time, all the things that were true about Ripple were also true about Bitcoin. There was only one operator and one distributor. So it would have been almost certainly a security under this draconian definition of things. And how does that benefit the industry? It really doesn't. So it doesn't help to call XRP a shitcoin, as some prominent people in the cryptocurrency space did in the response to this event. It's not a funny event. It's an existential event for the industry as a whole. The good news is I think that Ripple will prevail, and I think that XRP is going to win. And I think that it was very stupid for the regulator to approach this case as they have done, unless certain facts and circumstances materialize in the next 60 days to 90 days, then indicate that there's something more than what is publicly known. But on the surface, with what we know, what was said in the Wells submission, it just seems like a boneheaded thing, similar to the FinCEN recent decision, which was also pretty boneheaded and quite damaging to the industry as a whole. But, we in the cryptocurrency space, we all knew this. We knew that there was an uphill battle when dealing with financial regulation. And there's a great degree of nepotism and corruption and just counterproductive decisions that are made. I will remind everybody that Ripple made a decision to reward Ben Losky, a man who caused profound damage and harm to the cryptocurrency industry in New York, with a board seat and bringing him in. So as long as a culture exists where those who do harm to our industry and to entrepreneurs trying to innovate and revolutionize, that mentality is going to continue. So not only do we need to win some short-term battles, we definitely need to look at the policies as a whole and how this country handles financial regulation as a whole. Everything from investor definitions, things like the Howey test, which really make no sense in the context of the 21st century. We're no longer dealing with the 1940s. I think we can do a little bit better. And also the relationship of different actors in the ecosystem. For example, when you hold a cryptocurrency, especially proof of stake cryptocurrencies, this does give you certain rights. These are distinctly different than the rights that you gain when you hold Bitcoin or a security or a commodity or another asset. We should live in a culture where we proactively try to align those with the best interest of the growth and stability and sustainability of the ecosystem, as opposed to trying to cut them up like some sort of bed of Procrustes to fit some arcane regulation or definition that's 70 years old or 80 years old, or to avoid being in that particular box that's 70 years old or 80 years old. And lawsuits like this and events like this, they just at times show how short-sighted certain people can be, or how certain people work for a small group of people to protect corporate interests as opposed to actually benefit consumers. There are a lot of agency failures and regulatory failures in our industry, and there are a lot of problems in our industry. And in many ways, we're reliving the baronial age of the 19th century with the birth of Wall Street and the Wild West that it was. And we're kind of doing that much faster than they did. And we're seeing the similar types of behavior and collapses and so forth. But the difference is that to regulate this industry, you don't need to redo the regulation of the 1930s and 1940s. You can regulate it in different ways, and you can have different kinds of relationships with people. So I think in many ways, 2021 is going to be one of the most significant years in the history of our industry for cryptocurrency regulation in the United States. And it's going to be the deciding year of whether the United States is a friendly jurisdiction to cryptocurrencies or a hostile jurisdiction to cryptocurrencies. And should the United States make the wrong decision, I think cryptocurrencies are still here to stay. I just think the United States will lose its edge and our fintech industry will collapse, causing profound economic harm to the United States. And we'll cede all of that abroad. From our part, we work mostly abroad. We write software at home, we do science at home, but we don't pursue regulated activities at home. And we do a lot of fintech innovation with governments in the developing world. So we actually work directly with them and we talk about what do they want KYC and AML to look like? What do they want identity to look like and so forth. It's very satisfying because you don't have an adversarial relationship with the regulator and you're also trying to improve things as opposed to comply with things. But it's also frustrating because these systems in many cases are not batteries included. They require a lot of hard work. And that was the point of Cardano, to build a system that could accommodate all kinds of different regulatory models and all kinds of different use cases. And as a financial operating system with that kind of utility, it's my belief that as we build up the system, eventually entire economies can be run with this as the bedrock, doing everything from property registration to peer-to-peer lending to insurance, but also enforcement of regulatory regimes. So making sure the right people get the right information, making sure consumer protections are put in, and making sure that there's rule of law within that economy, especially in places where it's historically been absent. This is a multi-year, multi-decade endeavor. There are going to be setbacks, and it's not an easy endeavor, and it's at times very frustrating. But as I mentioned, it's also at times very rewarding because when you do make progress, you change people's lives. I admire that Ripple, at least on its surface with its mission, has been trying to innovate things like SWIFT and interbank settlement and innovate the way that value moves around the world. The reality is it shouldn't take 5 days to do a wire transfer, and it shouldn't take enormous fees to be able to move large sums of money. And with the systems that they've constructed, there certainly is some innovation there. And they always tried to take a hybrid approach where you have maximal decentralization and no centralized control with a cryptocurrency versus a central bank network where you have permission only and massive centralized control. They were always trying to find that middle ground as an entity. And they have done some great innovation like Interledger and other things within that domain. And it's quite unfortunate that this event has happened. And before everybody says shitcoin and print money out of thin air and these things, the US government printed $6 trillion out of thin air and continues to print trillions of dollars out of thin air. So I don't for a moment want people to go and pick on a private company that creates creative ways to finance innovation. This has nothing to do with some guy just making himself $5 and walking off into the sunset. If somebody wants to go and change something that's global scale, they need capital in the hundreds of millions to billions of dollars. And if I'm being told the US government can print money for a living, then why can't Ripple print money to service its goal, as Tesla has done with their season equity offerings, for example? And now they've created a battery power revolution. Okay, the world is different in the 21st century, and monetary policy is no longer the sole dominion of a single entity. And we no longer trust institutions to do these things properly. And if we're going to outsource to private industry, our healthcare, our aerospace industry, our fintech industry, then we might as well outsource to them the same fundraising capitalization tools that the government holds dominion. So say what you will about this particular entity. I do think that there's value that they provide for the ecosystem. And I think that their conduct has not crossed the threshold, at least with the facts that I have today, to indicate that this enforcement action was necessary. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It is not only unnecessary, it is irresponsible and dangerous for a regulatory body that is just about to experience a profound change of leadership to do this and then burden the next set of leaders with that unfortunate task of litigating. I would never do that. If I was a CEO of a company about to retire in 9 days, I wouldn't call up somebody and say, hey, I'm going to go buy your company, and the next CEO is going to have to figure that out. That's what Steve Ballmer did with the Nokia acquisition to Satya Nadella. It was a horrible mess, and it was an irresponsible thing to do during the changing of the guards. You never do this in a regulatory setting. So that alone is a disqualifier. And Mnuchin and his regime in the Treasury Department, they've certainly done some very questionable things, but recent regulatory events where they're setting fires on the way out are just profoundly distasteful. And as an industry, of course, we'll survive and we'll push forward. But this is just an indication that we need to fundamentally change our relationship with regulators. From our part, we'll reach out to our friends in the Congress and the Senate. And from our part, of course, we'll reach out to the relevant regulatory bodies and monitor the situation and try to get more clarity and more understanding of not only what is this, but then what's going to happen next. What's the treatment of proof of stake, for example? What are the custodial standards going to look like? What are the definitions of DeFi moving forward? What are the KYC AML standards? For example, with the FinCEN recent ruling, they just said, hey, you have 15 days during the holiday to talk about it, and we're not going to give you any clarity at all on how to comply. So good luck, and we'll let you know if you screw it up. Could you imagine that? A police officer knocking on your door saying, hey, by the way, we're going to be watching you very carefully, and if you commit any crimes, we're going to arrest you or write you a ticket. And you say, okay, well, what crimes are you watching me, or what would you like me to do? He said, we can't tell you that, but we'll be watching. That's effectively what FinCEN just did with this new wallet standard. They said there's new standards. We're not going to tell you what they are or how to comply with them, but we will enforce them. Good luck. This is not a proper way of regulating society. It's not a proper way of running a government, especially a democratic republic. And there will definitely be many, many, many litigations in the coming months and statements the coming months for us as an industry. We have money now as an industry. We have political power now as an industry. We have senators that like us as an industry. We're no longer a nascent industry. There are hundreds of billions of dollars at stake, and this constituency is not going away. And there's vested interest with the FANGs, the Facebook, Amazons, the Netflixes, the Googles, the Microsofts, and so forth, to get involved in our industry at some point because there's trillions of dollars at stake. And as a consequence, the regulators no longer have the ability to run buckshot over us as an industry. So there's definitely going to be some pushback, and that pushback is going to get more aggressive. And these regulatory bodies are going to start losing court cases. And when they start losing, then things will probably go in a very different direction. And this probably is going to be the bellwether case, if they choose to pursue it, that will fundamentally change the progression of things in the United States. So that's all I know. I hope you guys can read the reply of the Wells notice and form your own opinions. But we as an industry do have to stand together, especially when there's overreach. And we as an industry have done a pretty good job of doing that from time to time. I think it was a bit distasteful for Ripple to say that Bitcoin and Ethereum are susceptible to Chinese control. It's a bit xenophobic. It doesn't really make sense. Yes, the mining capacity is there, and that's certainly an interesting thing. But let's be clear here. If the Communist Party of China makes a decision to try to co-opt or influence the Ethereum network, they're going to be forked out very quickly. And it's the same for Bitcoin. So these are social systems, and they have the ability to bounce back from centralized control. And the very same arguments the SEC is making against Ripple, Ripple is now making against Bitcoin and Ethereum for a particular control mechanism. I will remind Ripple that their unique node validator list is an invitation-only club. They decided how that was going to work. Whereas proof of stake systems like Cardano and Tezos and Algorand, it's a permissionless system. You just have to hold the asset to have influence over it. I don't get to determine that. It's a key difference there. So the industry really does need to stand together, and the industry really does need to look at bellwether moments. And the recent FinCEN ruling and the FATF travel rule application and this particular case are definitely big challenges in 2021. But I remain optimistic that not only are we going to overcome these challenges, that I think ultimately it's going to actually reset America and put us in a much better regulatory environment for cryptocurrencies as a whole, and allow us to be innovators again. Because that's what we do best in America. We're innovators. And I'd like to make sure we stay that way, because the world works better when we are. All right, that's all I know. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll let you know the minute that we get more details, but it's unlikely we will until a lawsuit is filed. As I mentioned, there's a 4 out of 5 chance at this point, given the numbers, that a lawsuit will be filed. But it is the case that with the changing of the guards, the new administration may choose to drop this matter altogether. So nothing has yet been filed. The Wells notice is kind of the last step before that step is taken. So we'll see what occurs. Cheers.